Welcome to the STARS program, seniors taking active roles in society. And now, here's your host, ANITA FINLEY.
We have had the good fortune of having Richard LEDERER write a column for us for many years, and I always like when he comes on the radio, and we have him calling in from San Diego in California. So welcome to our show, Richard.
Thank you. Always good to be here, ANITA.
So you have you always try to send us columns that are apropos of the times and what's happening, and the column that's coming into our February issue, which should be out next week, is called Sexism and the English Language.
It is, right. And it was really taking off from the Women's March, and let me march up to that, if you don't mind, some recent events. Here's an interesting thought. We're all aware that Hillary Clinton won the popular vote by almost 2.9 million. Interesting, we are the only democracy that has an electoral college. And there are those that would say, hey, one man, one vote, one woman, one vote, and the vote counts. I'm not going to get into electoral college versus abolition, but ANITA, it's happened 5 times. And I'm going to ask our listeners to tell me what the losing candidates of the 5 have in common. Now, everybody knows the other one, obviously Hillary Clinton. And 16 years ago, anybody living in Florida knows that one. And that's Al Gore amassing the popular vote but losing to George Bush through the courts. The 3 before that were the election of 1888, where Grover Cleveland lost to Benjamin Harrison and then came back and won. So we have that one president that has a 4-year gap between his 2 terms. The one before that, 1876, Samuel J. Tilden, the most corrupt election in our history, losing to Rutherford Hayes. Very contentious. It ended up in the House of Representatives. And the first time it happened, which would be the 5th going backwards, Andrew Jackson in his first run losing to John Quincy Adams. ANITA and our listeners, what do the 5 losing candidates have in common?
What did they have in common? That they were all men.
Actually, Hillary
No,
Clinton
that's right.
was not
Hillary
a man.
wasn't. That's true. No, that's true. I lost my head there.
That's okay.
Okay.
And here it is. All Democrats. The 5 losers who have won the popular vote have been Democrats. And then, of course, we had the inauguration, which is not exactly old news. The word inauguration augurs, and these are soothsayers who would predict the future, and a general would march to attack or stay home, depending on what their prophecy would be. And they would often judge it by the flight of birds and measure it somehow that way, or they would extract the guts from birds. And on Inauguration Day, presidents spilled their guts on a flight of words. And to give you an idea that contentiousness is not new in our politics, 3 presidents boycotted the inauguration of their successors. John Adams, whose vice president turned around and defeated him, so he blew town, left town, and didn't go to Jefferson's inauguration, very early 19th century. His son, John Quincy Adams, after a awful election, very contentious, did not go to Andrew Jackson's. And Ulysses Grant coming in said, I will not ride in a carriage with Andrew Johnson. So Johnson, who had been president, boycotted the inauguration of his successor. So just some interesting facts there.
So let me ask you a question, Richard. Were you surprised when all the past presidents attended?
And of course they didn't all, because H.W. was not
right. He was
well
ill
enough to do that.
But he said he would have.
Yes, he said he would have, and that's part of the peaceful transition. That's what George Washington bequeathed us, Anita. And that is, he said, "Don't call me your majesty. I am not interested in a hereditary blood succession." And actually, he did not have genetic children. Martha Custis, whom he married, the widow Martha Custis, had 4, but he was not interested in that, and he stepped aside after 2 terms, although actually a little bit shorter because he didn't start till April. And Hillary Clinton, and that's part of, I'm so sorry, part of the tradition of the peaceful transition. And that is why, in my own opinion, a candidate who said, "I will not accept the results unless I win," flies in the face of that, the root of our democracy. If I lose, I'm not going to accept that. Well, excuse me, that's part of the peaceful transition.
Yes,
and
that's
Hillary Clinton
right.
accepted it and went in. And incidentally, are you aware, Anita, that you have had on your show somebody whose child was fired on national television by an American president? Are you aware that's happened to you?
No.
It is I, and you've had me on your show before, because my daughter, Annie Duke, was on Celebrity Apprentice in 2009.
Oh, my heavens.
And got to the last day, they start with 16, and down to the last day, Joan Rivers versus Annie Duke, the poker champion. And Annie was fired, and I am her father. So right now, that person is on your show. My daughter was fired on national television, NBC, by an American president. There you go.
Well, that's interesting. I only saw it once. I hated it because it's too painful to think about someone being fired, so I didn't think that was a very nice thing, so I just never watched it.
Right. Well, you can ask the acting attorney general about what it feels like to be fired, and a lot of, obviously, CIA people, because a lot of people are getting fired. And that is a gun metaphor, as if you're shot out of a cannon, fired, and, boom, over the horizon, and you're toast in history. So, at any rate, they did attend, and that's the way it should be with our democracy. And now you know the origin of inauguration. So getting to the sexism, I'm first of all very proud to say that my 2 daughters, Annie and her younger sister Katie, and Annie's daughter Nellie, her youngest child, so 3 offspring of me, marched in on the 21st, the day after, did march in the Women's March. That was the largest single-day protest in American history that day. And what my kids enjoyed is it was many different constituencies, but with a great concern for women's rights. But I suspect not everybody there agreed on a stance about abortion, but and this and that. But they got together, and apparently it was really heartwarming to exchange various views and to be united as women, with of course a number of men, and of course it was worldwide. So this is a good time to talk about 2 linguistic things, if I may. The first is the word boycott, and that's what we call an eponym, Anita, and it's a word that comes from somebody's name. So to give you an example, gerrymander, which certainly could have played a part in this recent election, is from Elbridge Gerry. He was a governor of Massachusetts who manipulated the districts to political advantages for the Republicans. And Gilbert Stuart, who did the portrait of George Washington and the 4 presidents following, took a district that looked like a salamander, put a head and legs on it and a tail, and called it at that point, gerrymander, after Elbridge Gerry, Since then, the G has been softened, and that came from a political cartoon. And when we hear gerrymander, we don't think about Elbridge Gerry, but that's the way it works. In this case, the eponym is a fellow named Charles Cunningham Boycott. He was an Irish land agent in the mid to late 19th century, and he was very tough, very strict, and it was a bad time for the crops in Ireland, and he would try to evict anyone who didn't pay full rent. So the enraged citizens would burn his figure in effigy, and they would not work in his fields. The businessmen would not do business with him, and his servants and so on quit the work at the house. The postman wouldn't deliver his mail, so he was the first to be boycotted. And obviously the women, quote-unquote, girl-cotted the inauguration, and that's where we get that word. And your folks, any question about language, Richard H. Lederer, you got to put the H in, LEDERER @gmail.com. They have a question about language, give me an email, and I'll probably give them an answer.
Well, I wanted to just tell you something. I was very interested in your column that'll be coming up, because I have always had a problem saying her or him, or when they said the man, I always wanted to say they, and I like that you said now it's okay to say they.
And it has been okay since the mid-16th century and probably going back to Chaucer. Yes, this is a myth. Let's, Anita, you, Y-O-U, it's singular and plural, and so is they. And when somebody says the cellular customer you are trying to reach is not at their station, nobody blinks, because his or her is what I call sexually transmitted tedium. Each student should bring his or her notebook so that he or she can achieve his or her full potential. Language is there to serve us. Each student should bring their notebook so that they blah, blah, blah. And it goes back probably to Chaucer, and certainly we get citations in the mid-16th century. And he, for all of us, or the ascent of man, Bernowski, and Jacob Bernowski, that book that was very big, 30 years ago, and he was taking off from Charles Darwin, The Origin of the Species and the Descent of Man. But every study shows that when you get sentences that use man is happy around the world, the average person thinks only of those like me afflicted with preposterone. No estrogenius and no children. And they have done study after study with this. We are finding out more and more that language is the window to the world, and that it may be paned, P-A-N-E-D, as in a glass pane, with crazes, cracks, filters, discoloration, and we're aware of it. And I am going to give you an example from our youth, Anita, where it was realized. When we were kids, there was a riddle that went like this. Why do they give hurricanes female names? Which they did until about 1969. They were all female, and the answer is, otherwise they'd be himicanes, not hurricanes.
Oh,
shorter,
you're kidding.
Shorter, blah, 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 blah.
Well, that's very funny, hurricane.
Chuckle. But that
funny.
was when we were kids. And then remember that you suddenly realize, wait a minute, we're getting a Daniel, and Hurricane Bob. That was a big one. I actually got through that one to get to Florida to speak at an English teachers conference. And and it was like, oh, yeah, maybe half of them should be male because hurricanes are not a lot of fun. They're a horrendous meteorological phenomenon.
But I'm going to use that when I'm glad you told me that, because now I'll say there's a hurricane coming.
That's right. And that has, and we hardly blinked. In other words, we just get those changes it's like when friend became a verb, and even unfriend, okay, it's something new. We take it, or at any rate, this is what happens with language, and generally we accept it. Just when MS came in, and that was a little controversial for a while, and then we realized, now wait a minute, men, when I was a bachelor, I was Mr. Richard Lederer, and when I got married, I was Mr. Richard Lederer. But for many women, when they were single, they were Ms., M-I-S-S, from the word mistress, and it's a clipping from the back. And then when they got married, they were Mrs., and when we were kids, you don't hear it as much, but it was Mrs. John Smith, like I'm owned by John Smith. I'm Mary Smith, and in fact, I'm not Mary Smith, I'm Mary Jones. In the case of my own wife, Simone Van Ageren, she kept her name, and that was fine with me. That's her decision, not mine, but certainly not to be Mrs. Richard Lederer.
That's very interesting. I hadn't really thought about that, but mostly it's right. You never have people introduced as Mrs. something. It's usually the name. Right.
And although it's interesting, right. And when I do, envelopes, I do, if it's John Smith, I do write Mr. John Smith. But if it's Mary Smith, I just write Mary Smith. But I don't write Ms. I don't write Mrs. and I don't write MISS, because those labels essentially broadcast the marital status and in a sense, the sexual availability of the woman. And only for women, not for men. But we don't do it anymore. And when we don't, it makes a difference as to how we see women and we see men, because language is that window out to the world. And I'm thrilled it makes a difference with someone like you, because you're powerful, you're influential, and, my own opinion is part of the recent election is with some women, they're self-loathing, 52% of white women voting for Donald Trump.
Talking about language, I do have to interrupt you. He certainly needs a language tutor.
Well, it is, people like me calibrate, first of all, the educational level of discourse in an election. This was the lowest we've ever had that has been recorded, because the computer, first of all, can analyze the sentence structure, and also, let's say the word win is going to be at a lower grade level than succeed. But let's face it, he certainly communicated with his constituency, and that is something, to be respected. But
well, let me interrupt you to tell everybody. This brilliant speaker, I'm interviewing Dr. Richard Lederer, Mr. Lederer, but I don't call people Mr. or I usually call them Richard. This is Richard Lederer. He's the author of so many books, but I always introduce him as the wordsmith of the world. And I don't know if that's okay with you, but that's how I always speak about you. And he's had so many excellent things, and awards, and he speaks all over. But he lives in Southern California, as I said, in San Diego. And if you'd like to know about his books, just go to his website, which is Verbivore, VERBIVORE.com. Will you explain what that Verbivore is?
Yes, and that would be great. Please visit my site. First of all, my column that I do for the San Diego Union Tribune is up each week. It comes out Saturday. My lovely wife, Simone, usually puts it up by Sunday. I married her for tech support, among many other qualities. But a carnivore eats meat, and a herbivore, and you would aspirate the H, plants and vegetables, and a verbivore eats words. Sometimes I do eat my words, but I am a word eater, and I am lucky enough, Anita, to have blown up the distance between who I am and what I do. There is just something about me that needs words, that consumes words, that loves words, that messes around with words, and that is what I do. And one of my favorite outlets is your BoomerTimes Oregon periodical, and I'm just very proud to be in it.
Well, we're very proud to have you. But I don't think I've ever asked you, when did this all start with you as a child? When did you know that you liked words?
I would think very early. Very early. I just was a voracious reader. I was from a family that did not speak full standard English, but because I was a reader, I mastered it as much as one can master it. And then I was editor of my junior high school literary mag, my high school newspaper, and I just wanted to work with words. But then I entered Haverford College as a pre-medical student, and I was a chemistry major or moving toward it, and just in time I discovered it's the word stupid. It's the language, and became an English major, an English teacher, and now a writer. You want to be that person you're put on the planet to be. And obviously, in your case, it's an example because you never say it, but you're interested in senior life, you're interested in periodicals, and I take it conferences and conventions. You're here to make other people's lives better with your gift, and therefore that's what you do best, and you just live a longer and richer life, and that's what I'm trying to do.
Thank you, Richard. That's very kind of you. I hadn't thought about that, but I just wanted to say that when you when you went to college, you were able to. It wasn't just English. What did you study?
Well, the first 2 years I completed my pre-med, so I did chemistry, biophysics, and the mathematics, and inorganic and organic chemistry, and I enjoyed that, but something was missing. It just didn't feel like it was I. And meanwhile, in the English classes, the Renaissance Lit, which I discovered there, and other things, it just, oh my God, I swoon at a man like Shakespeare. I faint in his presence. But then I went to Harvard Law School. I was at Harvard Law School a year ahead of Janet Reno, who I think has Florida connections, doesn't she?
Sure.
Or did she?
Of course.
And that was when we didn't have many women in the classes. But again, I was reading the cases for their literary value as I had been reading the chemistry formulae. And on this topic, will all of you out there please go see Hidden Figures, the movie? Absolutely inspiring.
Okay.
You know what I'm talking about, do you not? Hidden Figures?
Yes, I did hear about it, but refresh my memory because I've been in a daze.
I understand. It is the African-American women who were largely responsible in the very early 60s during a time of great segregation, and that's part of it, for
the computers. The computers, right?
Well, actually, the sheer math. Part of Hidden Figures means those numbers that you're trying to calculate for lift, gravity, parabolic flight, friction, and all. And here was this one particular African-American woman who could do it as a math genius. And then the early IBM computers were just coming in, and one of the other of these amazing human beings was involved in that. And a totally inspiring. And the other part of Hidden Figures is who knew about these women? They are figures who were hidden in history. And if I may say, with La La Land, which has gotten every award in the world, I want everyone out there to know two things. The musical segments were shot in the old Technicolor film, and that's why they look a little pinker and beiger than, like they used to. And second, Ryan Gosling plays that music. Unbelievable.
So La La Land is another?
Oh, my God, yes. It just set a record for the Golden Globe, 7 nominations, 7 wins, and it's tied at 14. And one of these days I'll be sending you a column on the Academy Awards. It's a specialty of mine.
Oh, I love the one you sent us. Right, and I do want to use... I love that.
But you may have to wait till next year because we're running this Sexism. It's up to you. Hey, run them both. Why not?
No, well, that's okay. But I do appreciate so much that you take the time to do this. And each one, they're very rare columns. They're not something you're going to find anywhere else. And I know that that's why we have a sophisticated audience. In fact, the Miami Herald, of course, asked us to insert our magazine because they said they didn't want to. That's why we've been doing it for the past probably 15 years, because they didn't want to go through the trouble that we go through. And they thought, well, we'll just do it. And their advertising crew really resented it. They said, well, why would we have something like that competes? And the publisher said, because we really like the magazine.
And I write two things on that. They are the best writing I've ever done, and I'm knocking on the door of 79. And I want to say that not to boast, but in the humanities, you can get better and better at it. It's the best stuff I've ever written, Anita, and I'll tell you why. A, I have a larger vocabulary than I've ever had, because whenever I see an interesting word, I look it up and I try to integrate it. B, I know more about writing, when to break a sentence and when to coalesce two clauses into one. C, I know more about language than I've ever known.
And I
D,
think, go ahead.
I sure know more about audience, and we also have your audience inspiring me. But what I am saying is, and they're very different, each one, you notice, and I just try. It's the best stuff I've ever done.
Thank you,
it's
Richard.
Getting better, and I want people to know that.
Well, thank you, and I hope you put them all in a book, but we thank you very much for everything. I always love having you on the show. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
All right.